with a lot of words. We showed you parallel transportation facilities to the rail corridors that will be included in this study. We brought those to you at the last meeting. As you remember, those were very wide corridors. They were 6 miles wide. That's a lot of area to cover. Just looking at the south corridor, that's 120 square miles that we would have to look through all of the socioeconomic data, all of the economic development, all of the population employment. So we tried to figure out a system of how to dwindle this down to a more focused study area. So all of the analysis I will show you now does not mean that those lines we show on the map are the ultimate alignments, but it helped us focus in on what we really need to concentrate on to choose the proper locally preferred alternative. So with that said, this is a high-level analysis. It helps us to get from the 6-mile wide corridor to something that is more manageable. Again, it is not designed to choose the alternative at this point in time. It gives us all of the background knowledge and the starting point. The evaluation criteria are solely based on the goals that you all have decided are important for this study. We found the socioeconomic information, the comprehensive plan information, development information that really fed into those goals and trying to flesh those out in order to get to the results. We applied this across all 3 corridors the same way, so everything was weighted equally. The existing rail alignments, because this is part of transit technology, bus rapid transit, commuter rail, potentially light rail, the rail alignments were simply carried forward. They were not vetted through this process. And rather than looking at 3 miles on either side of these parallel facilities, we only looked at a half a mile. So we're looking at 1 mile wide bands at this point in time. As you remember, these are the goals, the 4 high-level goals we have. And then you see underneath what fed into the analysis that plays into this particular goal. And this is your first handout. What we did was we put this, not any numbers, but just the background information of what we included in this analysis, because it was important to know and to understand, when we're talking activity centers, what is considered an activity center? So what did we look at? When we're talking about compatibility with current and future land use, what were the land uses that are considered transit friendly and went into this analysis? So all of this information is contained in your handout, and I will not go through each one of the bullet items at this point in time, to save us a little bit of time. Again, the other 2 goals, level service analysis, ridership, proposed bike trails, pedestrian facilities, all of these fed into the evaluation. With that said, this is the original map that we showed you in the March 14 meeting. This is our north corridor to Edmond. You see all of the pretty colorful lines, the parallel transportation facilities, because we have a wonderful grid system here in the region. This was the original information that was gathered just to give us an idea of what type of facilities we're looking at. Now what we did was, and I know this looks a little scary at first, you do have another, and like I said, I should get a good grade for the biggest handout of the day. All of this information is exactly as it is presented here. So in your spare time, you have time to go back, look at your criteria, and see how it was framed. We looked at each one of the goals and each one of the criteria that was used to evaluate how well this corridor performs. I had lived in the Oklahoma City area for 12 years, and I was surprised at some of the results that came out of this. However, with that said, it is all based on numbers, on study of the local comprehensive plans, on study of other local plans that were available, development initiatives, growth initiatives. So it is all based on factual information. As you can imagine, red means it didn't score very well, yellow, okay, green, positive. So when we look at footprint or right-of-way, there was ample right-of-way, so there was enough right-of-way either through building setback or a wide median that could be utilized for new transit alignment. Those things were considered across the board and then graded. I want to point out one thing, population employment, for example. Because the corridors have different length, we didn't take total population or total employment, but we brought it down to a density value in order to make it even for all corridors, because we have a rather short east corridor and then a rather long south corridor, for example. And of course, the Norman corridor would, rank a lot higher if we just took total numbers. As you can see from the analysis for the North Corridor, the Western Classen combination and the Broadway extension I-235 combination scored the highest. They are highlighted in green. On the left side of the slide, we pointed out a few things where they performed very well. I didn't point out any of the negatives, but this is a list of, this is what the corridor did really well. This is why it showed up in the analysis as positive. So we went from all of these corridors, looking at the buffers, half a mile on either side of the alignment, selected the two top ones, and that gives us a more focused study area. Remember, this is not to determine the actual alignment street later on. This is just to focus in our study area. So all of the information that we have already collected will help us do the alternatives analysis down the road. We did the same for the East Corridor, and as you can see, some of the areas, just by basic comparison of green, yellow, red, we're not matching the corridors against each other, but when you look at the matrix and you have them right next to each other, you might notice a difference in color. Looking at these corridors, the two that came out on top was the combination of 4th, 8th, and North 10th, and then Shields and South 29. Now again, remember, this gives us our study area. So Reno is not out of the running, neither is Midwest City Boulevard. It will ultimately be a combination somewhere within the defined study area where transit would be most beneficial to be aligned. And the same was done, of course, with the South Corridor. We started out with these, went through our evaluation. The corridors that came out on top were Shields Boulevard and Santa Fe Avenue. Shields Boulevard using US 77 and I-35 to get into Norman, of course, giving us a study area that looked somewhat like that. So everything that is within this study area will be considered for the alternatives analysis. Now, I know that that was extremely fast, and I know that after the initial GIS analysis was done, it took me quite some time to go through the matrix to understand, okay, this is why this scored well, this is not why this scored so well. So if you do have any questions after you look at the matrix, after you look at the criteria, please feel free to give me a call, let me know what you think. Have any questions. I mean, ultimately this is all based on facts. This is based on the review of the comprehensive plans from each one of the entities. It is based on 2010 census information. It is based on forecasted 2035 population and employment information that we received from ACOG. We also used the travel demand model to arrive at congestion, future congestion levels. So all of these facts played into this matrix. But again, I do want to point out the fact that those are not the ultimate alignments, but this is our focus study area that we can now start working with. I'd be more than happy to take any questions if I haven't completely run you over by now.
Comments or questions?
I have one question, I guess. Anytime there's a performance matrix, was there an analysis done to ensure that these elements are actually equally weighted in terms of their determinant of transit ridership or success, since they're scored in that way?
What we did within the corridor, the corridors are very different in character. We took into account general character of the corridor and adjusted them slightly. So the same plus in one might have a slightly different value in another, because it was important to show the differentiation between the parallel facilities within the corridor and not a differentiation between the corridors. So this was not about grading corridor east versus corridor north or south. It was, the point was trying to find the best facility within the corridor itself. So the weighting is slightly different.
I'll ask the question this way.
Okay.
Is the, serving a limited mobility population, houses with 0 cars, and the existing and proposed bike trails, are those considered equally important in terms of the success of the transit system?
In this case, there were. Because we grouped them into,
I know that's how it was added up. I'm asking, is that theoretically appropriate?
We have these 4 goals. I know that for some of these we had more criteria than others, but ultimately we were trying to get a balanced intermodal transportation system going. So there are a few more criteria that played into that evaluation. All of these are important.
But if I might to follow up, I mean, I'm just looking at the South Corridor and comparing, you've got a very little difference between the I-35-77 corridor and Santa Fe, and yet you've got a very big difference in terms of serving limited mobility populations between those 2 options. You opted for Santa Fe as opposed to the I-35 corridor, which frankly I'm not sure I understand quite why. But I mean, I think Blair's point is really a good one, especially when you have such narrow differences between corridors that you're making a difference and making a choice based on. And I'd be happy to discuss this offline as if everybody else here.
I-35 is within our area, so it is not out of the running at all. Kind of like Reno, if I click back, kind of like Reno Avenue for the East Corridor. Reno didn't score so well on the criteria we had, but we know it is an important facility within the region. So although it did not score high in this matrix, it is included in our focus study area. So in the South Corridor case, I-35 is in the study area.
I understand that, but I can make the same point with Sooner Road. So anyways, let me just have this conversation offline because I don't want to hold other people off here. I mean, I just, that would make a big difference if Sooner Road was the boundary. So, but anyways.
And what is the desired outcome of this process, complementary process?
The desired outcome was to get from our 6-mile wide study area to something that is more manageable. If we start out with too many alternatives, we get lost. We can't truly focus in on what is important. And if we would have had a case, if Sooner Road, for example, would have shown up as one of those really grand corridors and we still would have ended up with a 6-mile wide study area, so be it. Because that would have been important to know. This way we eliminated those obvious, not high contenders out of the study area, which allows us to focus in on the ones that are more important.
So what's an activity center? When it says number of activity centers?
Number of activity centers, we looked at high commercial and retail corridors. We looked at high schools, higher education facilities, hospitals, large employers, and I have to look at my list, town centers, larger community facilities. Those were all considered activity
Well, I
centers.
guess the reason I ask is I see Reno is like a neutral. I mean, it has the Chesapeake Energy Arena and the Convention Center. It has Sonic, headquarters.
We did those in ascending order.
Yeah. and taken to its extreme, it has the outlet mall. And I don't see how that can be neutral when it has some of the biggest, what I would call activity centers. And I'm not trying to be picky, I'm just trying to understand the definition of an activity center. If those aren't activity centers.
When it competed against the Capitol Complex, the OU Health Science Center, and some of the other things we have along, I mean, that was the North 4th and North 8th parallel facility. And then when you look at the large commercial area and the the new Midwest City Town Center on South 29th, Reno did not have as much as these other two corridors, which is why, like I said before, we weighted the corridors within our, we weighted the facilities within our
Yeah,
corridor.
I see what you're saying. Most of the things that I'm mentioning are near the hub.
Correct.
So what you're saying is further out on what would be a corridor. Okay, I'll buy that.
Okay.
Now, let me ask this, does this analysis in any way, you've gotten your box down, do all of those numbers and the determinations made there have a lot of weight in the end product? Or is this, did this simply get us to a point, now you kind of take that
Correct.
and we start a different analysis?
This analysis served those two purposes, to narrow the study area down to a manageable focus. And in the process, we acquired all of the data that we will need to do the alternatives analysis. So we've killed two flies with that one swat.
Doesn't necessarily mean that Shields Purple one is the leader for anything.
It's going to help us define alternatives.
Okay, that's
Correct.
Do you believe that it will change after the meeting with the stakeholders, these corridors?
Because this is not based on this is based on factual information. Those corridors, ultimately what you want is a successful transit system. If you do not have the ridership, if you do not access the activity centers within the region, then regardless of where somebody wants this alignment to go, it won't be successful because you do not have the prerequisites to make it so.
I get a call all the time about they would like to change the bus routes. I mean, that's a daily thing.
Well, you should change them daily.
If we could supply them, we would.
People listen. Well, any other comments or questions? We've got a lot on our plate today. Okay. Anything else? We have a meeting on July 18th. We're adjourned. Thanks.
Made it to the end. The battery was about to die on this one too. Man.